Hi, and welcome to an episode of the Jet Rails podcast. I'm Robert, your host, and today we're going to be talking about the challenges of organizing your growing tech stack. For those of us in the technology world, whether you're a website owner, you have an e-commerce store, regardless of what you're doing, you've got all of these different software applications that you're utilizing. As you add new things, there's technical debt. There are concerns about things like multi-channel integration, integrating software so that it works together, so the data flows and things are pieces of information are where you need them to be so that they're actionable and you can leverage them the way that you want and you need. And there's a lot, a lot of layers to that onion to peel back. So we're lucky to have with us today a great guest, Sheryl. Is here from the Cabinet M team. And Sheryl, would you do the honors of introducing yourself?
Sure. Thanks so much. And I appreciate the opportunity to do this with you today. So my name is Sheryl Shultz. I'm the founder, president, and COO of Cabinet M. Cabinet M is a marketing technology management platform that helps enterprise marketing operations teams manage the technology that they have and find the technology that they need. We actually have been around for a number of years. We work with organizations that are small to large, and we'll spend some time talking about that, about what users do with our platform. And, I'll look forward to answering your questions today.
Absolutely. And I'm going to start with one of my most common questions. How did Cabinet M get its name? Where did that start? How did that come about?
Yeah, so that's actually a funny story because Anita is my co-founder. Anita and I are career marketers, and we've been through lots of naming exercises, but naming your own company is a whole different thing. And so we spent a couple of weeks really going through the name generators, thinking about things that we like, changing up names. We actually grabbed, I want to say, 10 different URLs. At the end of the day, you want a name that people can pronounce and that doesn't mean anything nasty in another country, and that you can grab the URL and the Twitter handle for, right? And so we named it a number of different things. At one point, Cabinet M was going to be called Concisive. And then Anita was sitting in a movie theater waiting for a movie to start. And she's like, Cabinet, it's a place to save things, and it's a group of advisors, and M for marketing. And that's how it happened. So it's not a long, fancy story, but that's how we named the company. And we've really never looked back. People can pronounce it. And we grabbed all the associated names, although we did have to make our Twitter handle Cabinet M1.
Yeah, somebody beat you to Twitter, but nothing else. That's pretty wild.
They did. And it's ugly.
Yeah. Never a dull moment in the cyber world.
Yes.
And I know a lot of things we're going to talk about today. The principles are going to be applicable to different types of technology, but really, you've got this deep-rooted background in marketing. Tell me, what types of categories of marketing software does Cabinet M specifically work most often with? I'll say, what is it that comes up? Is it the email marketing platforms, the SEO tools? What is it that you find that's really in demand these days that you're tasked with helping users with?
Yeah, so I'll step back just to drop in 16,000 tools in its database. And those tools are indexed across 500 different categories. And so we have a very broad definition of what marketing technology is. We think about it as being anything that somebody puts into their tech stack. It's sales tech, sales enablement, creative operations technology. It is all of the technology that organizations use in order to plan and manage their everyday lives. And so those 15,000 tools grow every single time we get a new customer. We end up with another 30 tools. So to answer specifically your question, there are categories of products that we see in tech stacks all the time. And then every now and then somebody puts something in that's new. We tend to think of every stack as a snowflake. They're all different, right? Even companies that are exactly the same have different tech stacks. We just went through a a study for the PR Council. They're one of our clients, and they use the Cabinet M platform to actually collect data from their member organizations. So 50 different PR firms all map their technology. We added an additional 100 products. And if you look across those stacks, there were over 500 tools at play. And think about that. These are agencies, they're doing similar jobs. They're tiered in terms of size, but all of their stacks are very different. But to answer specifically your question, we do see email marketing, we see marketing automation, we see attribution, we see MarTech management, right? Because that's our category, and every one of our clients puts that in. We look at optimization, web tools, all the social channels. Lots of SEO over the last few years, more and more. We see CDPs, right? They're in play. Account-based marketing. In fact, we actually sometimes in our clients see an ABM stack, and people will break out, personalization and nurturing and email. So they get more granular in terms of what they mean there. And then, over the last year, we've seen, sort of in the ABM category, we've seen gifting, with companies like Alice and with Sendoso. Organizations are reaching out to their prospects, and they're using platforms to reward them in order to take meetings. And those companies are doing extraordinarily well. So, the stack just keeps growing, and it grows because categories grow. For a while when we started the company, there was no AI machine learning. Now there's a category, and all the associated products get tucked in there. And occasionally we're starting to see some AI and machine learning tools in those stacks.
No rest for the weary.
No,
but, Yeah, but that's very interesting. Just how much data you can wind up with, how insightful that no one's going to get one over on you in terms of, what platforms are really on the rise and what's falling by the wayside.
Yeah. And that's a great point, because we collect a ton of data in the back end of Cabinet M. So there have been over 800 stacks that have been built and are managed on the platform. And we have a function called Stack Insights. It's only available to our paying customers, where we basically expose the back end of our platform. We anonymize the data, we aggregate it. So if you're a HubSpot user or a Marketo user or a Pardot user or any user of any technology, literally, you can come in and put their name in and say, what do companies like me? And we give you the ability to choose B2B, B2C, nonprofit, et cetera. What are they using in addition to this platform? And what other categories of products are they using? And we give that back to them in rank order. And some of our clients will spend a couple of hours a week in Stack Insights, just mining the data, because there aren't really very many places that you can go for true technology adoption data. There's data that people report, but this is actual data that people are housing inside of Cabinet M as they try and get their arms around their tech stacks.
That's really interesting. I
Yeah.
geek out on data like that.
Yeah, us too. We have these great things called Stackmates, and they're actually prettied up, and we publish them every now and then. Just looking at the different products around what would traditionally be anchor platforms in someone's stack, just to show you how many times they show up when they show up in our platform.
Yeah. Well, it seems poignant to ask, have you noticed any surprising shifts in the last year or so? Things that became more in demand or really picked up. I know in the e-commerce world, where I spend a lot of my time, there have been a lot of pretty, in hindsight, predictable impacts. Things like store pickup and things that became very important.
Yes. So, we do see that. And we have a number of large retailers who use the platform. And, interestingly, we've seen some of those platforms not grow because you expect that they're just going to add more technology. But, we see organizations being very thoughtful about what they're putting in, but also what they're pulling out. Organizations who have Shopify sitting in the middle of that e-commerce experience, that has grown. I mean, the ecosystem around Shopify, we've seen grow twofold in the last few years. And even small retailers, and we've had some small retailers manage their stack on Cabinet M. We're amazed at the size of their stack because of those apps that live around Shopify.
Yeah, it's interesting that I've worked with a number through the years of Shopify and Shopify Plus users, BigCommerce users, more Magento users than anything, but also some of the smaller ones on WooCommerce, and I could rattle off at least a dozen other platforms I've worked with and supported merchants with. And I think part of the challenge that merchants sometimes don't realize is, especially when they start adopting some of these SaaS platforms, that they're about to add dozens of apps to their lives.
Yes.
That Shopify is pretty austere. It's not a very robust platform off the shelf. And so now you're going to wind up hiring all these different app providers in order to get some basic functionality. And by the time that you're done, you really do need to map it all out. And sometimes these things conflict. They don't work together. Often, they're not intended to work together. They're just one-off things built by some small software publisher off somewhere. And I think so. This leads back to these issues with something like Magento. You absolutely have lots of third-party integrations, but you also wind up buying a lot of extensions or writing a lot of extensions that you install, and it's just part of your main stack, and it's maintained as part of that main stack. And so it's in a lot of ways a little bit easier to plan and manage. And if there is a conflict, you can often work that out, where with third-party apps, either, something like Shopify, either they work together or they don't. Now, stepping back for a second, I caught that you work with both end users. So sounds like mid-market, enterprise, whatever sized users, but you also work with different kinds of agencies like digital marketing agencies and such. Is it as troublesome for the agencies to track all of this as it is for the end users?
Yeah, so let me clarify that a little bit. So we work with end users, and our, end users are everything from medium-sized companies right up through huge organizations, billion-dollar plus companies. And the, sort of the tipping point that we see in those end users are that they're using probably upwards of 50 to 250 different products in their stack. So once you get past about 50 products, it becomes hard to look at that data. If you're trying to manage it, you're managing it in a spreadsheet, and you're trying to track 20 to 50 different attributes, right? How many licenses do I have? What does it cost? What do my auto renewals look like? Is the product GDPR compliant? Does it collect PII, et cetera, right? And those are all things that we built into Cabinet M to make it simple. So that's the end user environment. Agencies are a little bit different. What started to happen, and this actually relates to the question you asked earlier about changes in the market. What we're seeing is increasingly there are organizations that are turning to digital marketing firms and to consultancies and to analysts, and they're looking for help with their tech stack. And so we partner with a number of those types of agencies and firms so that they can start by auditing their customer stack and then using that data as a way to build the going forward plan for what that organization needs to do. More times than not, after the initial audit, the client stays in cabinet M because for the first time, they have a true view of the products they're using, all of the different layers of technology those products live in, the way data is flowing between those products, and the way they're integrated. And so those are all functions that we offer to all of our clients. But some companies have teams that can actually implement internally, and some companies, need help doing something. And this becomes part of it. Maybe they've been using one marketing automation platform and, they've realized that they're scaling and they need more horsepower. Or we also see organizations, and we actually see them in both sides of our user, that are dealing with M&A issues. And so they're looking at multiple silos of data. And in that case, they have the opportunity to say, do we pick one? Mm-hmm. Or do we now implement best in class for what our organization is going to look like going forward in the future?
That's interesting.
And so,
yes. Yeah, I could imagine that. Do you really want to be running Klaviyo for this organization that you're acquiring, and MailChimp for this one, and Constant Contact for that one, and that, and the same in the e-commerce world? That do you want to run one Magento multi-store for all of them, or do you want to run 3 Shopify stores and 5 BigCommerce stores? It's there's a lot going on there. Those are probably some lengthy discussions that happen within some of these boardrooms.
Yeah, they are. And then, in addition to that, what you need to do is look at those contract details, right? Because you might have a platform that's performing at, 90%, and you have a 3-year contract and it's an expensive platform. And then you might have something that is a little bit better, but the contract expires in 6 months, and you need to make a decision. And it requires really not just looking at those tools today, but understanding from the vendors what that tool will look like next year, the year after, and having those conversations as well. Often in those M&A situations, and we've seen this, repeatedly, there'll be one person who uses something and they love it, they're dependent on it, but the functionality is already built into something else in the stack. And those are the hard stakeholder conversations that someone who's managing marketing operation or the tech stack needs to have with their stakeholders across the organization.
Absolutely. It's surprising at this point just how many places you can get the same functionality. And so talk CRM versus email marketing platform. Do you send those blasts out of HubSpot or those drip campaigns or what have you, or do you send it out of a more traditional email platform? You'll often find organizations that are in some cases doing both, and different people within the organization are leveraging one versus the other. And I think that applies to lots of categories of software. And, going back to you've got 6 months on that contract or 3 years on that contract, how much trouble does that cause? Because I imagine that for organizations that haven't mapped all of this out, that these things sneak up on them. I know if you want to re-platform an e-commerce website and you're under some kind of a contract, that can easily take several months. And I've seen it take a lot longer, for better or worse. But just as an average, you really need to have enough insight. Otherwise, you're going to wind up having to renew some license, because otherwise you're going to be up a creek without a paddle.
It's true. And so, one of the things that I always like to spend some time talking about is, how surprising it is to look at organizations that are highly organized, externally, when you look at them. And when you go in and you start speaking to them about the way they manage things today, they really don't. Okay. You can't manage this in a spreadsheet. You can't really manage it in an Airtable. We've actually moved people from Airtables, and we're talking super complex, multi-tab, Airtables over to, Cabinet M. And the problem is, it's on multiple fronts. One is it isn't simple to really look at it and see what you've got and what it's doing. Okay, that's sort of part one. Part two is reporting is a huge issue inside of companies. Someone is always asking the marketing operations team, what are we using for this function? How are our products integrated? Which of our products are GDPR compliant? Can you provide us a list of every one of our products that collects PII, et cetera, et cetera? And which of our products are renewing in the next quarter, right? We have users who have come to us. They've been, maybe freemium users. They're using our platform to track 25 products. That's what we allow users to come to Cabinet M and do for free. And you can use some of the functionality and not all of it. But at the point in time where you need in earnest to be cranking through reports, some of these people have said they sit in their office for, 2, 4, 6, 8 hours a week in front of PowerPoint and Visio and Lucid charts, building diagrams of what their technology looks like today. And then you change one thing and you need to move all your integrations around. And so that's part of what we enable. And from an organizational end user perspective, they're getting requests from sales. What are you using on our behalf? How are you generating leads for us? What are you doing to follow up? How are you scoring these leads, et cetera, right? Finance wants to know, what are you using? What are you thinking about using? What are you evaluating? IT.
And even what plan? I mean, so if you look at something like HubSpot, if you want to use a few extra features, the price jump is significant, and they're not alone in that. I don't mean to pick on them.
But we happen to be HubSpot users. So
I feel I see what that looks like. But I think that I have conversations every year with a few merchants that are on Adobe Commerce, what was Magento Commerce and or Magento Enterprise back in the day. And they're trying to determine if they're getting value out of it or if they'd be better suited switching over to Magento open source, to the free software version. And, they're not going to get a lot of help from the software publisher on that. They want to sell a license. Who could blame them? And so trying to figure out what's included, which should I be on, and so the same thing that a marketer would have looking at HubSpot, is it really worth that extra jump in price? Are we going to get value out of that? Is that a good spend? Those are some tough conversations. And there's a lot of mental gymnastics that goes into, what is this feature worth to me? What's my ROI going to be? And could I get that somewhere else and just peel that off and be just as happy for a fraction of the price? Or I think there's a lot of that. And the more that the industry, of course, goes SaaS, I think that's just another enormous challenge, because the ongoing cost can be so substantial so quickly, especially if you're still scaling up. If you're an organization that has new hires and that's going to have more seats and that's going to hit thresholds, and you've now got more than 10 users for this, now you've got to pay for the enterprise license. That predicting some of those things gets to be troublesome.
Yeah, and the problem that has been inserted into the SaaS industry is the hierarchy of the sales funnel. So if I have a question today and I decide that, I want to move off of any one of our platforms and I contact a vendor, I have to go through their process, right? I have to talk to a BDR who qualifies me. Then I have to talk to SDR, and, they're going to take what they've learned and get me further and further in the funnel. All I want to know is, can you do this and what is it going to cost? I actually, we used a vendor for data. I won't name them, a few years ago. And we weren't using the platform a lot. I wanted a smaller version. A lot of times what I was looking for wasn't there, but we still wanted to use it. Mm-hmm. And I spoke to somebody and I said to them, look, here's what I'm willing to pay. And, if you'll do it, that's great. Otherwise, no problem. I'll look for somebody else and that's okay. And literally, I had like 4 or 5 people call me after that, all trying to sell me something that was 3 times that amount, and I said to each of them, seriously, in your database, it should show you. Sheryl Shultz says this is what she's willing to pay. Otherwise, peace, cancel me out and, I'm going to sail on, and so a lot of times it's just the process is broken, right?
Well, and I think that sometimes organizations have a hard time. Look, if you're built for everyone, you're built for no one. So you have to at some point figure out who your target audience is. Now, there are organizations that have multiple departments that serve as multiple, types of users. They have real product differentiation. That's great. I know that I chat with our sales team all the time about, how we right size, right fit. And, we're always trying to hone that process to get people to the price as fast as we can. But, we need to collect a few pieces of information because if not, then people aren't going to be right sized and we're not offering them a 5-star product at that point. And if we're not doing that, then what are we in it for? And the same way that, we have entry levels. Yes. If somebody wants to know where we start on price, we'll tell them in the first sentence. And,
absolutely.
And so we're not trying to drag that part out. If it's not a match, it's not a match.
Moving on.
And that's
right?
okay.
Moving on.
Yeah. It's because we don't want somebody to have that bad taste of having to go through 6 people and jump through all those hoops just to find that out. We have a pretty advantageous entry level price, but so as a web host, we don't provide shared hosting. So there is none of that $10, there's nothing in the double digits, that sort of thing, that it's all dedicated single tenant, fully managed, highly optimized environments that in order to get the right support that, an e-commerce merchant or a more serious, business that's up and running is looking for, to get all of the security, the loading speed optimization, the scalability, the reliability, and to keep it flexible, not to give people some kind of a cookie cutter product that isn't going to actually meet the needs of their developers and such. We get it. There are people that are shopping at one end of the spectrum, and we're certainly not the most expensive, but we've got to focus on quality. And I'll say that it's a tough, I think from our side, it's a tough challenge. And, we do have tools that we're constantly honing to try to make it easier for our partners and such to just spin things up and make it easier. But, but you don't want to get away from making sure that people get exactly what it is that they need. And the more technical the product, I think the more that's necessary. So double-edged sword.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because, I speak to a lot of our users on the front end and, they'll say to me, well, so let me back up the bus for a second. We bill based on, or we charge based on the number of users and the number of products under management. Okay. We have 3 different subscriptions. We can get people on the platform for $300 a month. And it just sort of goes up on that, from there. But, I'll speak to companies who will say to me, I think we have 100, but we may have 130. I don't really know. And it's like, you know what? Honestly, you're going to grow from there and you're going to contract from there. Let's just start there. And if you go up, I'm not going to bill you between now and your renewal for those extra products. We don't do it. I pick it up at the renewal. If you grow from 100 to 150, I pick that up. If you grow from 150 and you get down to 100, we do that too. We actually, work with a company. And when we started working with them, they had over 400 products. And, they're like, we know that we're trying to get down to something in the 200s, and it was like, great, let's just price it for that. So I think that listening to the customer and being flexible in the way you think about, your pricing, so that that customer stays with you over the long term is really important, because it's about the value, but it's also about that customer experience. And being able to listen to them is really important. We've created tiers of our pricing because of things that we heard. When we started the company, we really thought that, small companies would need the platform. And we quickly learned that it was the larger companies that truly needed help organizing, managing, documenting, reporting, et cetera. But along the way, what happened was we found large companies that had small teams. They had 2 people, 1 person, but they needed all the functionality. So we created a subscription for those people. Same thing in speaking to users. There are, now I think Gartner says 49% of, large enterprise organizations have a marketing ops function. Okay. And, some of those functions are 1 person. Mm-hmm. And so, Cabinet M, is rolling out Cabinet M solo, single person, all this functionality. And as they grow, we'll grow with them. So, speaking to clients and really understanding and keeping your hand on the pulse of what's happening in these organizations is really important.
Yeah. And I think, necessity is the mother of all invention, right? So
yeah.
I even see it with us and the team's doing this for years, but we have our clients where we're auto scaling with AWS, and we're really, we love working with, some of those great public clouds, and we do, phenomenal things with it. But some folks, they just need a dedicated server. They're going to get the best bang for their buck that way. We're doing it a long time. But in the e-commerce world, for instance, there are some predictable spikes. And so maybe they need in Q4 in the holiday shopping season, they need some extra horsepower. Mm-hmm. We spin up some booster servers for them when they need them. We spin them down when they don't. Instead of making them pay for that hardware all year long, we created a solution to the problem and productized it in a way that works for those users and that doesn't really penalize them for that particular pattern of need. So, there are a lot of ways to get to some of these end goals, but I'm with you that whenever we see that kind of repetitious need, it's the same way that for things like, PCI compliance and security that we started to bundle in, the fully managed web application firewalling and intrusion detection and malware scanning. And, we're running the off server backups. And it's always about, what do the users need in the stack to be successful, to sleep well at night? And yes, some of these things are things that they could get from a third party and manage themselves, but is that really in their best interest? Are they running a 24/7 network operations center to handle that stuff? Not usually. So I think a lot of that comes together.
Yeah. So that actually leads me to sort of another piece of this puzzle, because the technology is only one part of it. The people are another. And so, what I'll say is that a lot of companies don't know what the technical proficiency of their team is. And so, you talk about the fact that, you use HubSpot, we use HubSpot. Organizations generally don't know how many users they have for that product. If they're going to migrate to a new product, they don't know, and it's something that, 3 years ago, we started, speaking with organizations who said, we're concerned about product, but we're concerned about people and process, and so, now a lot of those organizations are mapping and tracking, people on Cabinet M alongside of their tech stack, right? So that they're not surprised, when somebody comes in to, move to the next company and they find out they only have one person who can use Marketo or HubSpot or, anything. that they're using. And so we really, you have to look holistically at that stack. The other thing that, we find happening as well is that organizations, particularly now, right? Nobody's in the same office. Used to be you can, look over the wall and there was somebody that you could ask a question. Can't do that anymore. And so documenting processes and best practices has become increasingly important. Think about all the companies that have had to onboard new employees today, and the kinds of things that you learn just by being around people, right? We onboarded a new head of content, and we've never met her in person. I have someone who runs our social channels. I'm looking forward to the day where we can sit across the table and have a cup of coffee and chat. But documenting what you need to do if you want to add a product to the stack is really important, right? You want to look at, is there a budget for it? Does it need integrations? Are you going to sunset something in order to integrate that new product? Putting that out there in a way that everyone can see it is really, really important.
And, I have a love of integration. I worked for an iPass at one point.
Yeah.
And I don't know, one of my former coworkers from that leg of my career journey published an article, I want to say this morning, that was really interesting, looking at the cost of running an iPass and why some of them fail, and technical debt. A lot of great charts. I really liked his approach to it, because it's a tough business. And I think it's not only the iPass that has a tough time. I think it's a very similar challenge that end users have when now they've got, all these pieces of software that they want to integrate. And in some cases, maybe there's a native integration that does what you need it to do. Maybe the native integration doesn't do what you need it to do, and you need something custom. Maybe you're going to wind up, paying a third-party iPass, an integration platform, as a service, and those range greatly in price. There's the Zappiers.
Yes, they do.
Down market. There's, I could start rattling off, folks up market. And you also have, well, what if there isn't something off the shelf that's going to do it, or for whatever reason you choose that you need something custom? Now you need to go and find, some kind of an SI, a solution integrator, and have that and pay them to write it. And now you're probably going to host that with someone like JetRails, and you're going to have to maintain that code and document that code, hopefully document and maintain. And so you've got all of these challenges to meet just to get the data where you need, and because if not, it's not actionable. And I know in the e-commerce world, you look at things like, and for sure now, if you've got brick and mortar and you've got online sales channels, you're expecting, inventory and orders to be flowing so that there's, convenient curbside and store pickup, and, shop online, return in store, and all these other facets of an omni-channel experience. But I think that you're also expecting things to be able to work seamlessly, like gift cards and reward points, regardless of where you are, in person or online, and just loading up a new a new app on one side of the fence doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to work across your organization. A lot of and I see all the time folks that they've got all this great data, and it's not where it needs to be, so they're not leveraging it. They're not sending out the right promotions. They're not utilizing the systems that they have. One of our most recent episodes, we were talking about loyalty and reward programs. It's like, your merchandisers and your marketers, they know what they want to be selling. They know what the items are that the merchant's incentivized to move. But if you're not offering like double points with your loyalty program for that, you're missing out. and so there are all these that you want things to really line up well so that they can be used within the same marketing stack and within all these things. That I think that's the challenge that we're at, that there are so many pieces of the stack now that in some cases, you just taking the time to think about how you could use these things together is half the battle.
Yeah, that's a great point because, there's this debate that's been ongoing, at least for the last 5 years, okay, which is, do go to an ecosystem, right? Do you go to an Adobe ecosystem, a Salesforce ecosystem, or do you buy best in class, right? And what's the tax you pay for either of those decisions? What I would say is that for the past probably 4 years, maybe longer, I saw more and more and more companies just buying what they needed, right? They were willing to pay the integration tax. We have someone who can integrate it. We'll hire somebody to build that integration, no problem. I do think that, the platform vendors, particularly in the last few years of acquisitions, have made major headway in terms of building their ecosystems out and looking for, the holes and filling them so that large enterprise organizations could do more one-stop shop. I still think the balance is tipped towards best in class, but I don't think it's like this anymore. I think it's more like that.
Well, and it's you get the other side of the challenge is that what you want to avoid is jack of all trades, master of none. And so there are big players out there that, I think of NetSuite, has their own e-commerce platform, Suite Commerce, I believe, is part of their core. And every time I've seen it, I've wondered, who the audience is for that, because it was never really built to compete with a standalone e-commerce platform. So I guess, if you were already on NetSuite and just needed some basic e-commerce functionality, maybe spinning that up could make some sense. But beyond that, no one was ever going to migrate to it. And you see a lot of that, companies like Shopify that every year, rather than focus on their core, they take on another category of, fulfillment or email marketing or this or that. And they kind of get knee deep into everything, as opposed to being experts in something. And I don't mean to, go too negative on any company. These are some phenomenal companies that have, amazing stock prices and huge followings, and there's absolutely a market for all of them. So it's certainly not to come off, as too adversarial there. But I think that, I get into conversations with a lot of folks that it's a challenge. I think for the end users that they often get sold on the fact that they can get an all-in-one when they don't understand that it's so far from best in class.
Yeah. And again, it's really about how are you going to implement it? Right? Do you have the people who can implement it? Do you have the skills who can implement it? Because even though it's part of the same ecosystem, it's different skill sets to do different things. I look at, for example, Salesforce and Pardot. Okay. I know a lot of companies that have bought Pardot just because they were Salesforce, customers, and Salesforce for a period of time was really making it very attractive to implement Pardot. But it's not easy to use Pardot. It's not easy to use any marketing automation platform. Let's start from there. Okay. But, they were like, oh, you use Salesforce, if you implement Pardot, now you can send your campaigns off of that, et cetera. If you don't have someone who understands how to drive marketing automation, not CRMs, but marketing automation, it's useless no matter what you pay for it.
Yeah, if you're not triggering the right things, the right time, the right moment, if that's not your area of expertise, it's a beautiful tool, but it's not going to get you very far. And, I think so often part of the challenge is for me, what is it that's being evaluated that, I was talking with a friend in the industry recently about total cost of ownership, because that became one of the big driving conversations. It's like, I never bought a cell phone or a car, or on total cost of ownership, right? It's
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
you do want to
Yeah.
think about, okay, this one, it's going to cost more to insure, it's going to, this that, but I also look at things like
Yeah.
opportunity cost. So if I spend more here, I get these opportunities, and if I don't go that route, I'm kind of locked into this option, and I may not benefit the same way from it. That there's all of these levels of nuance. Do you have thoughts on how how these businesses and organizations that are trying to pick the right software, um, what they should be looking at? I think that might be the biggest challenge of all, is just what is the rubric? What are we
Yeah.
grading these
Yeah.
things on? Because and we've touched on some of the good stuff. I mean, there's pricing, and there's integration, and there's a lot of different moving parts. But it are there some major topics that you think get either too much emphasis in the conversation about what should be in your tech stack, or too little emphasis?
Yeah, so that's interesting because every company comes at this totally different, and every company makes those decisions in a different way. For some companies, pricing is the issue, right? They want to know, what can you do for me? How inexpensive can I build this, right? But then there are other companies that are far more thoughtful. And what they do is they literally lay out their requirements. What is it that I want? First of all, they start with the objectives of the organization, right? What is it that the organization is trying to achieve? What are the objectives of the marketing organization in order to meet those goals? And how do I take technology and execute against those goals?
I love
And
that. Yeah, because
yeah,
I love a good
yeah,
user story. Okay, it's not, we're not looking for a tool. We're looking to solve this problem or these series of problems. Now
yes,
let's engineer ourselves around that.
yeah. And so, what we've seen over, the last few years is, sales and marketing became a giant black hole, right? Everyone was buying things. There was a shiny new thing. Nobody was holding, sales and marketing to a standard from a budget perspective. And that stopped, okay? Because you can't prove ROI. You can't move ahead unless you know where you are. You can't secure all your customer data unless you understand what it's touching. So, I think that more and more organizations are getting more thoughtful about what they're using and why they're using it. And they're also starting to embrace the fact that there is a function called marketing operations. Their job is to rationalize all of this tech against the backdrop that you've presented them with the strategy and objectives of the organization. And, I spend a lot of time in LinkedIn. I spend probably more time than I should there. And, and I'm engaged with, an audience there that, does this job. And, I see the level of expertise and, the level of strategic thinking that's now there in that role inside these organizations. And it's not just inside of large organizations. There are, single marketing ops folks inside of companies that have made the commitment to make sure their tech stack is implemented appropriately from the start. A lot of times people are just like, we need a website, right? That's the first time technology comes in the company. We need a website. We need a way of sending out email, and so, from there, it sort of grows. But I think that decisions are starting to be made more thoughtfully, when companies start. But there are all of these companies out there now, 50% of them, according to Gartner, or 49%, are implementing that marketing ops function in some way. And I think that over the next couple of years, we will see better implementation of these technologies because they'll be implemented against that backdrop of what does my company need to do? Because marketing ops sits right in line to revenue now, right?
Yeah.
Those are the systems that drive revenue.
And it makes sense, especially for organizations of a certain size. It's the same way that, now there are officers in companies, not just related to security, but things like data privacy. And, which I know you've touched on in a few different ways. I have these interesting data privacy conversations because, as much as everyone's focused on on what data do you have, right to be forgotten, things of that nature, there are security implications. GDPR expects that you're going to have the right security mechanisms to make sure that the data is not stolen and that there isn't some kind of a breach. And now, yes, there's, PCI compliance for those that accept, credit and debit cards and such, but you've also got to deal with GDPR and CCPA and, and all these different regulations around the country and the world as well. And the risks involved in not. I think that in some ways, all of the advancement in a lot of these technology arenas is great, and I'm happy with it. I do think that it's going to take the market some time to adjust, to understand what is an organization's responsibility, small, medium, or large. Who do they need to task in their organization with which things in order to, and not only for compliance reasons, but, we're talking about a world where technology is at everyone's fingertips and, security becomes important. A lot of these other things become important. Look, I've talked a little bit about scalability, but I think it's hard for a growing organization to choose anything in their marketing tech stack without thinking about where they're going to be in a year or two, because nobody wants to migrate. If you're talking about a CRM or an email marketing platform, or the time it takes you to move everything over and get comfortable in a new platform, it's a lot of hours of labor. And I'm putting it very, very diplomatically there. It's anybody that's moved their house anytime recently, just think about that. Nobody wants to do this. It's a big deal, figuring out that right solution. So
yeah, I agree.
I think that's probably, back to why so many, when you're mapping out or your platform is mapping out what their tech stack looks like, that things don't align the way that they should, because it's just a lot of effort sometimes to re-engineer at the right moment, because what they had 5 years ago doesn't make sense now.
What we see is a lot of companies will come in and they'll build their system of record, if you will, right? What are the tools that we use today? They define them by layer. But then what they'll do is they'll literally take that stack, in our environment, they'll duplicate it. And then they'll start looking at what it could look like if they, retired, one product, if they sunsetted another, if they add a different one. And they literally go through that what if exercise, because the other thing that, we didn't really spend any time talking about is as much technology as there is in the stack that you've paid for, there is a ton of technology in these organizations that's been custom built, right? It's your homegrown technology. Sometimes we call it dark tech, at Cabinet M. But, a lot of organizations aren't tracking that alongside of their purchase technology. And what happens in that case is that you get a double whammy, right? You start mapping your technology, you start thinking about sunsetting something, you start identifying the integrations, and our tool lets you do all of that internally. But you've forgotten about that tool that someone built that no one's tracking, and it's connected to everything, right? And so, we spend a lot of time encouraging users to look not just at the technology that they've purchased, but also the technology they built, for multiple reasons, including, do you have something in your stack today with, overlapping functionality to that tool so that you can get rid of it, right? Because someone needs to maintain it. And every time you buy a new tool, someone needs to write an integration for it. So, so it's really the whole area of marketing technology management is very, very complex. It's not as simple as, I'm going to buy tools. I'm going to make sure that they integrate. I'm going to make sure that my data is passing. It's, fundamentally very strategic.
Yeah.
And, you spent some time talking about, how difficult it is for, companies to retire products. And one of the really sort of ugly things that we've seen happening over the last year, and it's a trend, is that, during COVID, there were certain, companies that were anchor platforms for lots of organizations. They were kind, right? They basically, they took their prices all the way down. They made sure people could buy what they needed. But those companies are jacking their prices way up. And to your point, it's super hard to take data out of these platforms and move to a new one. And
part of why I've always loved open source. I like installing it, owning it. I don't like surprises like that, but yeah.
I mean, we've seen it. We've had some clients who, who have shared some really pretty ugly stories about that, with us, where, they were paying, X for a product during, 2020 to 2021. And they started doing planning and they reached out to get a quote. And it's like, oh my God, I may have to get rid of this whole set of tools in order to pay for that now. It's really, that's not being a good citizen.
Yeah. There's, there's multiple directions that these things come in. And, some of them, they're your silent partners, that they're based upon transactions or the amount of data or the amount of bandwidth or the amount of revenue or some kind of metric that has to do with your growth. Now, I do understand some things like, from a hosting perspective, the more bandwidth, the more cost. But there's a time when, when it pushes you into another tier and all of a sudden, you're adding some zeros at the end of something. And there's really no middle ground where this does get tough. In the same way that I've chatted with a lot of merchants in the last couple of years that have been migrating from Magento 1 to Magento 2. And, a common theme is, well, what extensions and apps and integrations do you have? And so start to go through this exercise of mapping out. And it's this this more modern trend of, does this extension bring you joy? And, are you really still using this? Do you really still need this? And would you be better suited with this newer thing where you get these 5 things in one anyway, and you don't need these 5 individual separate pieces of software? But through that process, the hardest part is often by that point they've had 3 sets of developers, and there's some custom integrations and extensions written. There's no documentation. No one knows exactly what they do. They have an idea, but they're named very, very obscurely, and trying to get to the heart of, okay, well, if you build your site without that thing that you don't even know what it does, how are your operations going to be impacted? I don't know. Start to go down this rabbit hole. I think that one of the lessons is start documenting now. Documentation starts today. It's never, it might be late, but it's never too late to start going down the right path.
Yeah. So, so that's an interesting point, because 3 years ago during the summer, 4 of our clients lost their marketing ops person, right? They left. It's popular. It's people getting paid well to go, and they went. And, we spoke to one of the global heads of marketing ops, and she's like, it's bad, but I've got everything documented. So at least somebody can step in. In that company, we have been through 3 sets of marketing ops folks, and we're about to go through a fourth set. And, it's horrible, right? They need to go, they need to hire, but their stack is fully documented. And all of their contracts are fully documented inside of Cabinet M. They're not going to miss an auto renewal. They're not going to miss any of the detail involved in managing any of those products. Somebody can come in, they can look inside the platform, and they can see the stack, they can see the integrations, they can see all the contract detail, all the customer data flows, and they're off and running. And so documentation is huge when it comes to tracking this. And let's face it, 26% of marketing's budget is being allocated to technology. You need to actually, manage it the same way you would manage anything else. So, that's what we try and do for our clients. And, we see them come in.
Imagine they were employees and not pieces of technology. And one of them, leaves or something, happens. You need to know what they do every day. And, and what you need to be looking for in terms of a replacement or not, and determine those things. But it is still surprising to me, maybe more surprising than it should be, when I run into these situations where, you come in to give a consult and it's okay. I mean, I'm rather people be honest with me, but they don't know what they've got and why and how. That in some cases it's because so-and-so was using it, or so-and-so thought it was good, or in some cases they're just following a competitor. Oh, we saw a great, company that used this, or read an article about a company that used that, and we figured that was going to be great for us. But they didn't really look at at a wider range of data. They didn't really, compare other similar platforms or solutions. So I think some of that homework, and it's, as you say, that there's so many pieces in a stack. For you, what's an average number of applications that one of these companies is using? Is it 20 some
in
odd?
our Oh no, it's way beyond that. So in our environment, really on average, there's somewhere between 75 and 100, really leaning towards the 100. And so, again, we cast a very wide net. So we have one very large retailer that has, and you'll appreciate this, right? They have a branded credit card. And that branded credit card is in their MarTech stack. And it's in their MarTech stack because it touches loyalty platforms and rewards platforms and email platforms. And so organizations really have a very broad, view of what they put into their technology stack from a marketing perspective. We have, all your productivity tools, your Jira, your Slack, your Asana, your Trello, people put them in because they think about them as workplace collaboration tools, right? So yeah, on average, that's what we see. The largest stack that I've ever spoken to someone about, they couldn't decide if they had 1,000 products or 4,000 products. And, that was there's a large automobile company. And actually, we could not do that work. We actually referred that business out to, a consulting partner because, we're not consultants. Okay. We have a platform, and a lot of companies like Cabinet M might, surround it, with professional services. We choose to partner for those because there are people with very specific sets of expertise who really need to focus on these technologies. We focus on providing them with the best way to manage.
So, when I'm not making podcasts, I'm with you. We host websites and applications. We don't want to build them. We don't want to market them. We partner with great marketing teams and great digital agencies and folks that, it takes a village. You have to really, back to that jack of all trades, master of none. You have to pick what you're going to be good at and what you're going to be reliable for. And really, you want to lean into that. So no, I'm all about that. I think that makes perfect sense. Be part of an ecosystem.
Yeah. Yeah. And, the thing about it is we've seen large companies who have 20 or 30 products, that's what they needed. Someone made the decision and it works for them. In general, we don't see that a lot in large organizations, but, quite serendipitously, we have clients who've left the organizations they've worked in, they've gone to startups, and they're back on Cabinet M. They're using the freemium version. They manage up to 25 products in their stack. And on the day that, they need to do more, they get in touch and we flip them into a small team, or a solo subscription. So, it's interesting to watch how the industry has grown. But, we see really on average about 100 products in a tech stack for an enterprise organization.
Interesting.
Well, it's crazy.
Yeah, Sheryl, this has been a really insightful conversation for me. Before we wrap it up, any final words, anything we didn't touch on, and anything in your crystal ball for the upcoming year or 5?
Yeah, in my crystal ball, I do see lots of organizations truly moving towards digital transformation and digital transformation efforts. If COVID did nothing else, it really enforced the fact that it's important to have all your systems working because not everyone is going to be in the same place anytime. That's going to require more and more technology. But we do think that organizations need to start looking at that and to look at their tech stack against that in terms of, moving forward. We really believe that every company, if they manage their technology, has the ability to eliminate significant spend from their stack. Our clients end up reporting that they eliminate about 20% of spend in 6 to 12 months. It's eliminating duplicate contracts, those overlapping layers of technology, the tools that auto renew, nobody's really using them. And, we think really now's the time, the industry's at a tipping point.
I've seen a lot of it myself, so I can appreciate that, and I've been involved in a lot of conversations that I think really, really thinking about it now, highlight that I think that we're going to see more and more of that, and I think this is how industries work. That you get some strong players, but then you get the next wave and the next wave of innovation, and things have to keep evolving. So that's the beauty. That's why I love tech, because it always keeps me on my toes.
Me too. Yeah.
Well, with that, thank you so much for sharing all of your time with us and our audience today. And we look forward to more updates with you in the future as the world of technology does continue on that evolution. To our listeners, as always, thanks for tuning in. We'll have more great content like this for you soon. In the meantime, stay safe, stay healthy, happy selling, and enjoy every moment of it out there. Even if sometimes your technology stack is fighting against you a little bit, I can't imagine living without it. So we'll bring you more soon.